Hey everyone, my name is Shauna, in case you don't know, and welcome back to another video. This month is Disability Pride Month. I am someone who is disabled, and I wanted to make a video about my GI issues and how that impacts my life and how I am disabled because of that. I'm going to be going all the way back to 2018 with this, so you may have heard some of this before, but this is going to be a comprehensive summary of my GI issues. I'm hoping that this video will do a few things. First of all, I'm hoping that people will see this video and not give up hope on figuring out what's going on with their body. I am hoping that people may see this video and go, oh, I'm not alone in my struggles. And if there's a slight chance that someone watches this video and goes, that sounds like what I have, then I seriously hope that this can help someone find an understanding and seek a diagnosis for what's going on with them. So my GI issues first started in 2018. I have a condition called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and one of those symptoms is nausea. My nausea was severe, but it wasn't the worst that it could have been, which I wish I would have known that would have gotten worse, because then maybe I could have mentally handled it better in 2018. In 2018, when my nausea first started, I stopped eating as much. Oh, and I should mention trigger warning for eating disorder related stuff. Although I do not have an eating disorder, disordered eating, but not an eating disorder. You will hear more about this in a little bit. So I'm pretty sure I've had POTS since I was 12, if not younger, but it didn't get significantly worse until 2018. And that was because at the end of 2017, I got sick, and that sickness triggered worse POTS symptoms. So this sickness triggered really bad nausea, which made it difficult for me to eat. And it was never because I was anxious and my anxiousness was causing my nausea. It was always because my nausea would make me scared that I was going to throw up, which would then make it so that it was hard for me to eat. And that's something that doctors struggled for a super long time to accept with me, and a lot of doctors still struggle with accepting that. A lot of doctors assumed that I was getting anxious, my anxiousness was causing my nausea, and therefore I wasn't eating, and that means that I had ARFID, which is an eating disorder. I don't have ARFID. The thing about ARFID is you don't have ARFID if it can be explained by a physical health condition that you have been diagnosed with. So I was in an eating disorder temporarily because of this nausea making it difficult for me to eat. And in that program, I was experiencing a lot of frustrations and difficulties with the staff members there. They would not take my nausea seriously because they all were convinced that it was just for my anxiety. I ended up leaving this program and my eating improved somewhat, but it wasn't the greatest. I got my weight a little more stabilized so that I was not at a super low weight that made me at risk of being hospitalized. In 2019, I was seeking a new primary care doctor because my previous primary care doctor was one that, like those doctors in the eating disorder program, wanted to blame all of my nausea just on my anxiety, when I knew for a fact that it was not for my anxiety, because I was only having the anxiety that was impacting me eating because of the nausea happening first, which is a very important distinction that I wish I could just force people to understand better, because a lot of people refuse to understand that. So I was seeking a new primary care doctor, and I think I went to 2 or 3 different doctors before I found one who I explained my symptoms, including my nausea, and her first thought was that I had postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. She immediately referred me to go get diagnosed. I think the test I had to wait a couple months, and I got in and I got diagnosed with POTS. So bam, nausea figured out, right? It's connected to POTS. No, my GI issues did not stop there. So I think it was around 2019 as well that I was getting a lot of stomach aches while eating and bloating. So my first thought was, okay, what could be causing this? Am I having a food allergy? And my nausea was somewhat worse too, and so I figured maybe that's connected to a food allergy. I tried to cut out dairy out of my diet. That was very unsuccessful and caused me to lose a lot of weight in a short period of time, which is not a good thing for your body. So I had to put dairy back in my diet. Then I cut out wheat. And surprise, surprise, I apparently am allergic to wheat. Now, I've not been diagnosed with celiacs. I'm not sure if all of you have been aware of how difficult it is to get diagnosed with celiacs. So they do a standard blood test to try and get you diagnosed at first. The blood test doesn't always work. It doesn't always come back that you have celiacs. And in order to take the blood test, you have to be eating wheat and have it in your system, which by that point I had realized that wheat was making me sick when I wanted to go get tested for celiacs. So I stopped eating wheat, and I would not put the wheat back in my diet because after I stopped wheat, my nausea went down a little bit, my bloating was basically non-existent, and there was this burning in my stomach that I would experience when I was eating wheat. That burning sensation was gone. So I did sometimes get stomach aches when I was eating food, but I was feeling a lot better after having taken wheat out of my diet. I eventually realized that soy was causing an issue as well, so I tried to cut out some soy. And cutting out some soy helped a little more with the pain in my stomach and the nausea as well, although it wasn't perfect, and it's unrealistic for me to take soy out of my diet, given how picky of an eater I am, and given the fact that I already taken wheat out of my diet. And a lot of times online I hear people saying, oh, you should go vegan or vegetarian, that would help out a lot with your symptoms, you feel a lot better. Listen, if I go vegan and vegetarian, there isn't much I can eat because I am so picky, and because like I am allergic to wheat. Sometimes I would go to a restaurant when I was eating solid food, and the only thing I'd be able to eat at the restaurant was a slab of meat, because that's the only thing they could guarantee that they could keep safe. Because if you touch a piece of bread and don't wash your hands and you touch something that I eat or drink, I'm sick. So like, you have to be super careful when you have celiacs. So I thought I figured it out. I thought that was going to be it. And then 2020 happened, and my GI issues took a turn for the worse, and this is how my GI issues are still impacting me today. I believe it was June or July of 2020 when I was eating food and I started noticing that it felt like it was getting stuck in my throat. And my nausea was way worse than normal, and it felt like something exploded in my gut every time I ate food. Now, I hadn't changed anything that I was eating in my diet. I was very cautious about what I was eating because of my allergies, and because I'm also super picky and paranoid about getting food poisoning, because I got food poisoning once and I'm so scared of getting that again. So I was panicking because anytime I would eat any sort of food, it would get stuck in my throat. And even things like a smoothie that is mostly liquid would get stuck in my throat as well. And I had about like a month, maybe a month and a half, where every single time I would try to eat, it would create this feeling of something being stuck in my throat. I would get extremely nauseous, and my stomach would feel like it was actually exploding on me. I had many panic attacks, and then eventually it became too difficult for me to keep eating food. I had many ER trips where they just gave me a little bit of anti-nausea meds, which anti-nausea meds actually make my nausea worse. So the typical anti-nausea meds they were giving me were not helping. I got saline IVs for POTS, which did not help, because the food getting stuck in my throat thing, not POTS related. I even called 911 at one point because it was really bad and my parents couldn't get to me in time. The ambulance took a look at me and they're like, oh, you're fine. You could just wait for your parents to come and take you to the ER. Eventually, after going to the ER, I think it was like 7 times, maybe 6 times, like they kept refusing to admit me, even though they knew that I wasn't eating food. And they did simple like blood tests and stuff, and they would always tell me, it's just your anxiety, it's fine, you can leave. So after all these numerous ER visits, they admitted me into the hospital. I got admitted into a hospital in my city that I will never go to again unless I am legitimately cut open and bleeding, because I have had multiple family members go to this hospital when they've been cut open and bleeding and the hospital helps them, but it seems like with other issues the hospital just doesn't know what to do and they don't help. I was in this first hospital 11 days and I kept explaining my symptoms over and over again to different doctors, and the doctors were like, well, it's just your anxiety, you need to get over it to eat some food. At one point, a doctor said, we are going to give you a feeding tube. And this doctor seemed nice. And this doctor said, we're going to give you an infant feeding tube because it will be much easier on your body, because infant feeding tubes are much thinner and easier to get in and out of your nose and stuff like that. But then the time came to actually get the feeding tube, and the main doctor that was in charge of me had changed, because they change every few days. This new doctor, I don't know what his problem was, but he did not like me, and he decided to give me the adult one, and he put me under to get it in, and we got it in, and my GI symptoms were way worse. The tube was impacting my like gag reflex. I was extremely nauseous and I felt like I was gonna puke and I was gagging, and they ended up ripping it out, and eventually I left that hospital because there was nothing that they could do for me, and they just basically had me laying in a bed paying high amounts for them to not do anything. They would just run a couple simple tests, like I believe they did like an ultrasound, and they did an upper endoscopy at one point, and they're like, nothing's wrong with you. And I was like, there is something legitimately wrong with me, but they just wanted to convince me that it was all my anxiety. Then the second hospital I went to, I was in there for 11 days as well. I had a feeding tube, and they came to the same conclusion. There is nothing wrong with me. It's just my anxiety, and I need to do exposure therapy with food. And that was miserable, and it's really defeating to have doctors not take your physical symptoms seriously. I don't remember if it was the first hospital or the second hospital, but one of those hospitals also put anorexia on my chart, which I very much do not have. Legitimately, I don't want to send any hate to anyone with an eating disorder or spread any misinformation, but I found that it's so much easier for doctors to blame physical symptoms, especially for AFAB people, on things like anxiety and eating disorders, because it's so much easier to say, oh, that's just a mental health problem and it's not like a physical health problem. So I found it to be really defeating, which makes it hard because these eating disorder programs, and I was like in a refeeding program at the second hospital, these programs, especially the eating disorder programs, need to save these spots for people with eating disorders who can legitimately be helped by the programs. But I was being pushed into these programs and taking spots from someone who actually could benefit and need the help for an eating disorder when I, in fact, didn't have an eating disorder, which I found to be really frustrating. Like, there's long wait lists to get into different, like, programs and eating disorder programs, and I'm like, I'm taking up a spot that needs to go to someone who can be helped by this program, and I'm not one of those people, and it was frustrating to me. And I'm not trying to say like, oh, I'm better than everyone else because I don't have an eating disorder. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that resources were being put on me as if I had an eating disorder and taking away from the people who actually could benefit from those resources. And the third hospital I was at tried to convince me that I had this thing called like a physical thing, like psychological physical thing. I forget the exact terminology that they use, but they're basically convinced that things like stress and stuff can make my nausea worse, which again is sort of basically like saying that anxiety makes my nausea worse, but it was just a fancy terminology. And because of that, I was like, oh, we know what's going on with me. Spoiler alert, they did not know what's going on with me. So for several months, I was in this place where they dealing with this condition. And I'm not even entirely convinced that this condition is like a legitimate thing. And I'll tell you why in one sec. But basically, the therapists that I worked with were trying to convince me again that it was just my anxiety and stress, and it was really defeating. And after being in this program for months and months and months, I finally decided to quit when one of the therapists explicitly told me that POTS is just my anxiety and that POTS isn't a real diagnosis. And I was like, I literally had a tilt table test and was diagnosed with POTS. It is not my anxiety. But the reason why I'm not 100% convinced in the program and in the fact that this condition is real is because I was watching this documentary about a cult, and this is gonna sound really, really weird. Trust me, it freaked me the crap out. So I was watching a documentary about Nixium, which is a cult, and it was my first time watching a cult documentary. There was striking similarities to what was being done in Nixium, like the base level stuff about how it was advertising as a self-improvement program and the types of words they would use and types of information that they would have their cult members learn, and the program that I was in. And it was freaking me out that there were so many similarities between the two. Like, I was being forced to listen to podcasts, read articles to try to convince me that this condition is real and that I can just be treated in therapy. And then my physical symptoms were being ignored and just saying, oh, it's just your anxiety, it's just in your head. Your head is the one in charge of this, so you can fix all your issues using your head. And I was like, this is so invalidating, it doesn't seem real. So then for a while, I was not doing anything actively to seek out information about my GI issues because I felt so defeated. Eventually, I did go to a GI doctor. I had a swallow study, and the swallow study was not great. The doctors were not kind. They basically determined that there wasn't anything wrong with me, despite the fact that they acknowledged in the test results that whenever I would swallow, my throat would sort of like push it back up and like sort of gag a bit. They were noticing something with my muscles contracting in a certain way, but they told me it was just all my anxiety. So yeah, and then my GI doctor sent me a super long message. Oh, since nothing showed up on your test results, which is a lie because something did show up on my test results, she was like, this just means that you have ARFID and that you have anxiety. And I was like, please just stop. And I sent a long message to her explaining how defeated I was and how much I did not appreciate her doing this, despite the fact that I had opened up to her in our first session about how much doctors had misdiagnosed me with ARFID and how much they tried to blame stuff on my anxiety when my anxiety wasn't the thing causing my GI issues. Then I finally got referred to a new GI place, and here's where things somewhat start to improve. I went in to see this new GI doctor, and I described my issues, and she said, I'm gonna do these tests that you haven't had before, and I think that we may be able to figure out what's going on with you and get you some help. I also have this thing where I can't burp, and she referred me to a doctor that can help me with the inability to burp, which I haven't done that yet. I'm going to do it, but there's a reason I haven't done it yet, and I'll explain it in one sec. So she referred me for a test. And let me tell you, the test sucked, but it gave me answers. This test was called an esophageal manometry test. I'm going to read off a little bit of information off of the Mayo Clinic's website to tell you about this. This says esophageal manometry is a test that shows whether your esophagus is working properly. The esophagus is a long muscular tube that connects your throat to your stomach. When you swallow, your esophagus contracts and pushes food into your stomach. Esophageal manometry measures the contractions. The test also measures the force and coordination of esophageal muscles as they move food to your stomach. During esophageal manometry, a thin, flexible tube catheter that contains pressure sensors is passed through your nose, down your esophagus, and into your stomach. Esophageal manometry can be helpful in diagnosing certain disorders that can affect your esophagus. This is the test that I needed the whole time, and no one in any of the 3 hospitals that I stayed at was willing to give me this test. And then I went to a GI doctor, which I have had bad luck with GI doctors, but then I went to this GI doctor and she finally was like, we're gonna run this test. I did not request this test, she brought it up on her own. So then testing day comes around, and let me tell you, that was a bit traumatic to say the least. I have so much trauma revolving around feeding tubes because of being in the hospital that having another tube going in me that way was really hard. So essentially there is this tube, and you can look up videos of this. I'm not going to show videos and pictures like on the screen now because it is too triggering for me to look at pictures and videos of this tube. So picture a tube, and there's little balls all along the tube. These little balls measure your throat muscles, esophagus muscles, and their contractions as you're swallowing. You have to swallow a bunch of like essentially Gatorade that has electrolytes in there that they can measure your throat muscles with it. So this was really hard for me because it brought back a lot of memories of having feeding tubes, and also because I have a really strong gag reflex, which makes things like this really hard. So basically every time that I would swallow when the tube was in my throat, I would gag, which is what happened when I had a feeding tube in. So I had to have my mouth open and try not to swallow until I actually got the nerve to swallow what I was supposed to swallow for them to get the results. So the test took a while. It was really embarrassing because I had to have my mouth open like an idiot the whole time because I couldn't swallow normally with that tube in, but I got it done. And here's where I finally got answers. I have ineffective esophageal motility. And now this isn't a perfect diagnosis because I think there's other things going on. It doesn't explain my extreme nausea and extreme stomach pain whenever I eat solid food. Oh, and I should say, I've been drinking protein drinks, and that's how come I don't have a feeding tube currently and how I'm still able to like be alive and functioning. So they basically found that my throat muscles aren't working at the same time to push the food down into my stomach and function like they should be doing, which is what's creating the feeling of food getting stuck in my throat. I had never heard of this condition before until I had this test done and I met with this doctor, but it gives me really a lot of hope that I have a diagnosis now and that hopefully I can find a doctor that will know how to treat this someday. My current GI doctor basically told me that there's nothing to do. And she was trying to tell me that the doctor that can help me with the issues is the doctor that can help with my inability to burp. That doctor is only specialized in the inability to burp. He isn't specialized in this ineffective esophageal motility. So I've got to find a doctor that can help me out with this. So I've sort of been in a standstill just trying to figure out what to do about this ineffective esophageal motility. But basically that's where I'm at in my GI journey, and that's what I've been through. And it has been not very fun to say the least, and I wish that I had no GI issues. I would rather have anything else than these GI issues. I personally find that in terms of all my disabilities and health issues, GI issues is the one I would want to make go away the most. I can deal with lightheadedness and fatigue from POTS. I can deal with my fibromyalgia pain. I can deal with lack of sleep from insomnia. I can't deal with my GI issues. They're too unbearable and too really challenging to deal with. So yeah, don't give up hope on getting a diagnosis because this took several years before I got a diagnosis for what's going on with my throat. It was only in October of 2023 that I figured out why I feel like food is getting stuck in my throat. But I first started having the feeling of food getting stuck in my throat way back in 2020. Oh, and one more thing that I want to mention really briefly is that I have extreme body image issues now because, like, I have to stay on this protein diet, this protein drink diet, and this diet is making me gain weight a lot. And because of that, I've gained a lot of weight and I feel really insecure in my body, but at the same time, I can't do anything about it until I get help with my throat, which is really frustrating to me and it's really been challenging for me. But at the same time, it's opened my eyes more to the world of fat phobia and the way that influences people, because people can't just like necessarily just choose to lose weight. It's not as easy as that. I also physically can't exercise due to POTS. So people like myself have a disability that can cause them to gain or lose weight and we can't control it. And so people making comments on other people's bodies needs to stop, because we don't know what's going on with like other people's bodies. You never know if they have a health issue that's impacting their weight or anything like that. So yeah, this was a bit of a rambly video, but I wanted to talk about my GI issues. If you're having GI issues and you don't know what they are, stick in there, keep going to different doctors, keep trying to remind yourself that you will find an answer and you will potentially find a treatment that can help someday, but you've got to be strong and you've got to push through. And I know how hard it is. You got to find a good support system, whether that be friends, family, therapist. Find that support system that can help you through this, because it is so defeating to have doctors not take your issues seriously and not help you figure out a diagnosis and a treatment plan. But you have to keep hope, because there is hope out there. There are so many doctors in this world, and one of these doctors will have an answer to help you out, but you have to just keep pushing through and find the answer. And I keep telling myself that a lot too, especially because it's so defeating to now be on year 4 of not being able to eat solid food. Yeah, that is really all I wanted to say about my GI issues. I'll have some other videos linked down in the description below. It would be like a whole little playlist about some of my other health issues and about my time in the hospital and all that. Being disabled is something that I struggle to attach pride to. Like, it's called Disability Pride Month, and I'm not proud of being disabled, but I am proud of being strong enough to keep fighting despite what's going on with my body. I hope all of you are having a great July, and I hope all of you are taking time to learn more about different disabilities this month, since it is Disability Pride Month. And I will see all of you in my next video, which will be hopefully uploaded next week. And until next time, everyone, goodbye.